Hi, folks, back for another lecture, huh? This is the one on gross domestic product. Well, I'm going to break this up again, like the other lectures, into two or three or four so that they don't seem that long, and also so I guess I can upload them a little bit. So, GDP is one of the three major macroeconomic indicators. There's GDP, inflation, unemployment. There's actually a whole bunch more. But the three most important ones, the ones that are reported about the most on the in the business and financial news, are GDP, inflation, and unemployment. That's what we're going to talk about right now. So we're officially getting into macroeconomics. So what makes macroeconomics different from microeconomics? In microeconomics, we look at the behavior of individual economic agents, meaning like firms and consumers. If you ever took me for a principles of microeconomics class, we would talk about the behavior of governments as well. In macroeconomics, what we do is we aggregate. We aggregate data to certain levels. Now, the most common level of data aggregation is the federal level, but there's nothing that says we have to do that. You can aggregate to smaller levels or even bigger levels, the global level, if you wanted to. So, for instance, if you were an economist, let's say working for the city or county of San Diego, you'd probably be aggregating data to the city or the county level because that's more relevant to you, right? You might be aggregating data on unemployment, or you might be getting that data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or you might be looking at the price of homes and things like that. If you were an economist working for the state of California, or here's another one, let's say you were working for the California Association of Realtors, they hired you to keep track of the housing market, then you would be aggregating data on homes in California. Again, like I said, we typically, when we think about aggregating data, we look at things at the national level. Or we could also aggregate data by sector. So we could talk about the manufacturing sector versus the service sector versus the agricultural sector. Or we can even aggregate data among participants, meaning like households and firms. Like, what is household income? What are corporate profits? What are sales? Those are all examples of aggregating data. And when we do that, we're firmly in the world of macroeconomics. All right, so what else might you want to know about macroeconomics? It's a lot less theoretical than micro. In at MiraCosta College, Econ 101 is macro. So some of you may think, oh, well, I'll take 101 before I take 102. But some of you might have had micro already, and there's nothing saying you shouldn't take micro before macro. In fact, if I was a world dictator, I think I'd make everybody take micro before macro. If you did have micro, or you're going to take micro, one of the things you'll notice is that micro is very theoretical. You know, we develop these really sophisticated models about utility, and we say that somebody has a utility function, and then we might even put some calculus to that. In macroeconomics, we're looking at the day-to-day economy, the kind that most people live in. Also, if you were watching something like CNBC or Bloomberg and they were talking about something that's happening in the economy, chances are it would be macro. They might be talking about the jobs report that's coming out. They might be talking about inflation. They might be talking about tariffs that Trump is going to impose and what kind of macroeconomics effect that might have. Or, it's a kind of thing that like a lot of your parents, your boring middle-aged parents, might be talking about if they were over for a cocktail party or something like that. They might be talking about how their investments are doing, or what does the economy look like. So this is macroeconomics, and this is what we'll be focusing on for the remainder of the term. Okay, so these are some macroeconomic variables. Don't worry about this; they won't be on the test. I'm just putting them up here to give you an indication of what are some of the economic tea leaves that people try to read to get an idea of what's happening in the economy. So this is 1 week out of the economic calendar in 2006. This would be a typical fourth week in any economic calendar. So you see that consumer confidence came out. That's a number that they get by surveying people and asking them a bunch of questions, and they figure out whether or not they're confident or not. GDP revised, that's the thing that we're going to talk about now. The thing to know about GDP is it's an estimate. How good an estimate is it? Where it's pretty good, but there's some error built into it, and we don't always have all of the data. So what they do is they break down the year into 4 quarters, and they will come up with an estimate for the first quarter in April. Because the first quarter runs from January, February to March. Then they'll get some more data. They'll do another revision, and then they'll finally do another revision. So what's coming up here on Wednesday, or what came out on Wednesday, August 30th, in 2006, was the first revision of quarter two, which would have ended in June. So that makes a lot of sense because this is August. Personal income, that's how much money people made. Personal spending. And by the way, you'll notice there's a column that says forecast and prior. So a lot of times what happens is there are people who are called economic analysts or financial analysts, and their job might be to predict, so to speak, what the numbers are going to be. And if the actual number comes pretty close to the forecasted number, then nobody's surprised. If, however, the actual number is way, way different than the forecasted number, then maybe that'll move financial markets for that day. People are trying to get a sense of what's really happening. And so you'll see other things like Chicago PMI. PMI is Purchasing Managers Index, or factory orders. Are they going to be up or flat, or what's the deal with that? Auto and truck sales, the car companies track that on a daily basis. So the only thing they need to wrap up the month is the last days of the month's worth of sales. Average work week, how many hours on average has an American worker been working? 33.9, a little under full time. Hourly earnings, are they going up, or are they staying the same, or are they going down? Non-farm payroll. So if you're going to be doing the nail the number contest, the two big numbers that come out in the jobs report, there's a whole bunch of other ones if you ever want to read one. But the two big numbers that come out are the change in non-farm payrolls. This is how many jobs are added or lost. I mean, in recession, jobs do get lost. And then what is the U3 unemployment rate, which we'll talk about when we get to unemployment. So this is a good time in the U.S. economy. This is before the housing bubble burst, so 4.7% unemployment. That's pretty low. Today we're doing even better than that. And then some other macroeconomic variables. Again, I'm not going to test you on this. I just want you to get a sense of what we're talking about when we talk about macroeconomics. All right. So in the very, very beginning, and I think it was like the first lecture, we came out with a model that was called the circular flow model, and that showed that firms and households interact in two different markets. Excuse me, the factor market and the goods market. The reason this is important is because there are different approaches to calculating GDP. The one that we're going to focus the most on is this thing called the expenditure approach. So that looks at expenditures made in the goods market primarily. There's another approach that's what's called the factor payment approach. Every factor of production gets a payment. So if you're a worker, you put in your labor. What do you get in return? You get a wage. If you're a landlord and you provide land, then what do you get? You get rent payments. If you're a bank and you lend money, you get interest payments. So if we were to add up all the wages, all the rent payments, all the interest payments, all the profits, we should get the same number for GDP, and I'll explain what GDP is in a moment, as we would using the expenditure approach. So that's one check. And then there's another thing called a value-added approach. So this is our macroeconomic model. It's basically saying that firms and households interact in two markets. One is the goods markets. That's where we go in to buy stuff made by firms. And the other one is the factor markets. That's where we provide factors of production in order to make money. And it's called a circular flow because unless we bring something in, there shouldn't be any leakages. I mean, there's not, there is an economic activity that's going to go somewhere else. We can bring other things in. One thing we could do is we could bring in the government. What is the government's role in our economy? I'm talking about the economy. The government provides services. So how does it provide those services? It taxes households and firms. And then in order to get what it needs to provide those services, it goes into either the goods market or the factor market. So for example, this wonderful education that you're getting at MiraCosta College. MiraCosta College is a a government-funded institution. I realize you guys are paying fees to attend MiraCosta, but they're probably not covering, I know they're not covering all the costs. So where does MiraCosta College get the money to provide you with this excellent education? They tax people in the community, right? They pay property taxes, and that goes to the government to provide a service to people to get an education. At the same time, MiraCosta College has to hire people. So where are they going to get these people? They're going to go into the factor market. Or MiraCosta College may need to buy computer equipment or build classrooms or things that are already made. And what they'll do is they'll get that in the goods market. Does that make sense? So this is a government's role in the economy. The government taxes people and firms to provide government services. All right, if we bring in foreign economies, then what foreign economies do is they either buy goods or factors that we export, or they sell us goods or factors of production that we import. So, for example, if we were to import oil from another country, that would be coming from a foreign country. That would count as an import. If we were to, let's say, export oil to another country, that would be a factor export on our part. Or if an airline in another country bought a Boeing plane, right, then that would be something that we would be export a finished product. Or if, on the other hand, let's say you buy a Volvo or something like that, then that would be an import. That would be coming from a foreign country into the United States. So this is adding a little bit more complexity when we bring in foreign economies. All right, so let's talk a little bit about GDP. GDP is the value of final goods and services produced for the marketplace over a given period within a country's borders. There are three domestic approaches to calculating GDP. The one that we're going to focus on the most is the expenditure approach. There's two others that I'll talk about briefly as well. One is a value added and the other is a factor payment approach. The reason we need more than one approach is because without having other numbers to check against, if we only use the expenditure approach, we have no idea how accurate that number is. If we can bring in a couple other approaches, we should more or less get the same number. Remember, these are estimates, so we could be off by a little. If a little is not that much, then we're going to be happy with that number. When we're making international comparisons, meaning, like, let's say we're comparing GDP in the United States to GDP in Mexico or GDP in China, we have two different approaches. One is called the market exchange rate approach, and the other one is called the purchasing power parity approach. So the idea behind the market exchange rate approach is, let's say we're talking about GDP in Mexico versus GDP in the United States. Well, we use dollars, so our GDP is going to be reported in dollars. Mexico uses pesos, so if we're trying to compare the U.S. economy to Mexico's economy, we've got an apples and oranges problem, right? We're using two different currencies. So one way we can make an apples to apples comparison would be to take GDP in Mexico in pesos and convert it to dollars using the exchange rate. And you can even get more sophisticated than that because the exchange rate changes from time to time. But the idea is that once you bring Mexico's GDP in pesos over to dollars, now we can make an apples-to-apples comparison. Well, the problem with the market exchange rate approach, the thing that the purchasing power parity approach tries to resolve, is that a country's currency may not be properly valued. It could be overvalued, it could be undervalued, and even if a country's currency is properly valued, there may be differences in purchasing power. Meaning, like, if we assumed, let's say, that the peso and the dollar are properly valued, and you think about what it's like, let's say, living here in San Diego off 60,000 a year, and then think about what your life might be like in Mexico if you're making $60,000 a year, you'd say to yourself, "Wow, I've got a lot more purchasing power in Mexico." So maybe what we need to do somehow is adjust for the fact that there are differences in prices, irrespective of the exchange rate. I mean, the exchange rate, it doesn't have to be accurate, but there's that. What we're trying to do is we're trying to make a real apples to apples comparison where it counts, not so much in what is the dollar value of Mexico's GDP, but what would it be like based on the prices of goods and services in Mexico to live there in terms of US dollars based on purchasing power. All right, so the thing that we're trying to do with GDP is we're trying to explain this thing called the business cycle. Right now, we are somewhere, I would say, around here, an expansion or a boom. A business cycle has 4 phases. So what happens is, and it doesn't matter where you start, you could start at the expansion and end at the trough, or you could start at the trough and end somewhere else. So imagine that we're talking about the last business cycle. The last business cycle, and let's say we say it ended at the peak. This would have been in 2008, 2000, roughly 2007, 2008. So what happened was the economy kind of reached a peak, and then when the housing bubble burst, it started going downhill. We went into a recession. Oops, let me go back. We went into a recession. The recession lasted until about June of 2009. That's when it kind of bottomed out. Then we started going into recovery. It was a slow recovery. It's been a slow recovery. However, the economy's been expanding for about 8, 9 years now. At this point, usually, in at least in the post-war period, the U.S. economy doesn't expand more than 10 years before it falls off a cliff one more time. So maybe we're pretty close to the peak over here. Eventually, we'll go into another recession, and this cycle will start over again. So one of the things that we look at when we look at the business cycle is GDP, gross domestic product, and that's what we're going to be talking about right now. So the 4 phases of the business cycle in any order are expansion, peak, contraction, trough, and then we go back into a expansion or recovery. Does that make sense? All right, now some of you may think you know the definition of a recession. Some of you probably do. But one definition of a recession that you probably heard that is not actually correct when we talk about the U.S. economy is the 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth. That is actually the definition that applies to most economies in the world, but we're different here in the United States. You know, like in most other parts of the world, when they play a game called football, they play it with their feet. You know, when we play football, we throw the ball, right? So that makes us kind of different. In other parts of the world, most other parts of the world, they use a thing called the metric system. We use a thing called the English system, you know, inches and gallons and stuff like. Even the English don't use the English system. Another thing that makes us different is the way that we define a recession. Okay, a recession in the United States is whenever the NBER says we're in a recession. The NBER is the National Bureau of Economic Research. They're a bunch of academic economists that get paid a little extra money to kind of meet every once in a while and talk about what's happening in the economy. And according to them, the NBR does not define a recession in terms of 2 consecutive quarters of decline in real GDP. Rather, a recession is a significant decline in economic activity spread across the economy, lasting more than a few months, normally visible in real GDP, real income, employment, industrial production, and wholesale retail sales. So I just want you to be aware of that because that could be a question on an exam. What is the definition of a recession? All right, so the Business Cycle Dating Committee of the MBR, by the way, it's if you're saying dating, oh, maybe I should join. It's not that kind of dating. These are people that get together and they date the business cycle. I mean, I don't think they go out with them, but they look at when, you know, the recession ended and when the recovery started and when, you know, the economy peaked and then started. That's what I mean by dating. According to the MBR, the Great Recession, the last one that we came out of, started in December 2007. Now, interestingly, they made that call even though in 2008 the economy had not, in the fourth quarter of 2008, the economy had not suffered 2 straight quarters of negative GDP growth. Basically, what was happening at the end of 2008 is the economy was going off a cliff. The stock market was going crazy. People were losing their jobs. The housing bubble triggered all that, had collapsed. There were companies that were going bankrupt. Banks needed bailouts, all kinds of bad things. And they said, oh, yeah, I guess we're in a recession. And that recession started back in December of 2007. So I'm just letting you know that's kind of one of the quirks of our system. All right, so I'm going to end it here. And then what we'll do is we'll get started in GDP. Does that make sense? Good.